This is the quad operator that Humble Audio just sent over to me for a review. Thank you to Humble Audio. Let's get into it. This is an amazing take on FM synthesis. Let me show you why. It's 4-operator FM. There's a row for each one, and there's an output for each of the 4 operators. So let me just plug one in. Let's go with operator 4. We can sweep through all the classic wave shapes. We can also use this detune knob for fine tuning within an octave. And then the ratio knob goes up and down the harmonic series, which are the nicest intervals to use for FM, but you can also just switch it to free. And then it's completely free as a tuning knob. So those controls are identical across all these 4 rows of operators, and there's also a master pitch for the whole thing with a fine-tuned control. With most FM synthesizers, you have certain algorithms that determine which oscillators modulate which other oscillators. So you might have oscillator 1 modulate oscillator 2, which modulates oscillator 3, which modulates oscillator 4, and you listen to oscillator 4. Another common one would be something like oscillator 1 modulates oscillator 2, and then oscillator 3 modulates oscillator 4, and you listen to both of those outputs together. And there might be a lot of different algorithms, but they're all fixed, whereas with the quad operator, you have this modulation matrix that allows you to choose which oscillators are going to modulate which other oscillators, and to how much, including self-oscillation. So let's just patch this up again. So we're listening to operator 4. Why don't we use operator 3 to modulate operator 4? So this is the row of things that can modulate operator 4. We'll go to the 3rd row to get operator 3 modulating operator 4. And if we change the shape of 3, that affects the sound in all kinds of ways. Changing the ratio leads to all kinds of different timbres, and of course, detuning takes us a little bit out of that pitch relationship. Now what if we modulate the modulator? We'll have oscillator 2 modulating oscillator 3 here. So as you can hear, a whole huge range of awesome gnarly FM tones are possible with this setup. Now there's also a whole bunch of CV inputs. You've got bipolar CV over each oscillator's ratio as well as shape, and then you have this gain input per oscillator. With nothing patched in there, the oscillators are at full volume, and then as you patch something in there, they'll follow whatever CV comes in to set not only the volume, of course, of their final output, but by extension, the amount of modulation that they are sending to whatever destinations you've set with these knobs. So maybe if we listen to operator 4 again, we've got all this crazy modulation coming from the other operators, but if I send the exact same LFO to the gain of the other 3 oscillators, you will hear their modulation come into play. And you can see the LEDs reflect their volume. Now there's also a volt per octave input and a linear FM input. So if I just patch a little pitch sequence in here, you can hear that. And let's bring back some of our modulation. And linear FM is good for things like vibrato. So if I just add an LFO there, of course you can go wild with it if you want. Additionally, there is an audio rate FM input here. So you can, in addition to all this modulation going on here, add another source that could go up to audio rate to further modulate the entire thing, or however much you want, because there is an individual sort of modulation send, just like for the other operators to each other, from the audio rate input to each individual operator. Now there's an entire other box of tricks here with this little switch. If you switch from VCO to LFO, the rate of all the oscillators drops way down to control rate, and now you have this really complex modulation source with 4 outputs, and you can just use this as a source of all kinds of crazy control voltage. Actually, even just listening to it when it's in LFO mode can be pretty wild. All right, another cool thing, this algo module. This is an expander for the quad operator. It lets you save 3 presets and crossfade between them. So let's have a listen to what's going on here. Let's say I came up with this patch and I liked it. I can press any of these slots and hold. And after it flashes, it means that it's stored to that slot. Right now we're listening to the live knob positions. So if I click on A, brings us to a preset that I stored earlier. Now I can go back to C. And the last 2 that I touched are on the crossfade knob. So you can see as I turn the knob, it goes from one to the other. And of course there's a crossfade CV input, so if I plug in an LFO here and turn up its amplitude, you can hear it crossfade quickly between those. We can make that even faster. A lot of fun to be had with the algo expander. So I think this is such a cool module. Being able to be this hands-on with FM is super fun. You've got 4 different outputs that you can use simultaneously to get really thick sounds, or again, using it as a modulation source is super cool. If there's one thing that I would say that it's missing, it's kind of ridiculous, but I feel like it would be cool to have CV control over each of the modulation matrix parameters. However, like if you can imagine adding 16 jacks to this module, it would be like 150% of the size. So it's probably not really practical, and using the gain inputs to just control the amount of modulation of an entire operator at once still leads to a lot of really, really cool sounds. So super dope, really good job, Humble Audio. This is such a unique way to approach FM synthesis. It's some of the most fun I've ever had with FM. Highly recommended. Quad operator, super nice.